party this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK.
Here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock and I'm Michelle Dewberry. Coming up tonight, it's all kicking off in council land. There's been an issue, a warning issue, should I say, that councils don't have the money that they need to even, I quote, stand still. What has caused this situation? There's also been another warning, this time from central government, to tell local councils, any of them that are operating on a 4-day working week trial, to stop immediately. Local councils have responded by telling central government basically to butt out. Who do you agree with? And Qatar, it's got fingers in lots of pies here in the UK, and that'll of course be the same Qatar who have very close links to Hamas. So now folk are calling for sanctions to be applied to Qatar, or at the very least for us as a country to stop doing business with them. Should we? You tell me. And in what I would call basic common sense, everybody, the boss of Unilever says that he's finally going to stop trying to force social purposes onto brands, i.e. no more virtue signalling. You can just go buy your tub of ice cream or your pack of washing powder and just be left alone. Good is what I say. Do you think other brands should follow suit? And very important question. Why is the UK seemingly so bad at managing bad weather? You tell me. Also, can't help but notice big news today. There's been a big signing when it comes to somebody that's joining the GB News team. Have you seen the news? We'll have that and more. Yes, it is Friday, so Dewberry Tavern does open as well. We have a lot to get through. There'll be lots of lively debate with me, Michelle Dewberry, till 7. But before we get stuck in, let's cross to Aaron Armstrong and get tonight's latest news headlines.
Yes, it is minute past 6. Very good evening to you. There are calls for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire in Gaza. That's being voted on by the United Nations in New York at a special General Assembly meeting. Western countries, including the UK, have been calling for a humanitarian pause in fighting so that aid can be delivered. Arab nations, though, are pushing for stronger wording, saying more needs to be done to help civilians. Here, the Prime Minister and the Labour leader are under growing pressure to change their position. The London and Manchester mayors and the Scottish Labour leader have all broken ranks to challenge Sir Keir Starmer's stance. Shadow Environment Secretary Steve Reid justified why the party's standing firm on its decision.
Pause allows the aid to go in without stopping Israel taking action to disable the terrorists who attacked them in the first place. A ceasefire would stop Israel from doing that and would lead the terrorist capability intact. If they're left with the same capability, with the bombs, with the weapons, holding, remember, over 200 hostages, then they will go back into Israel and they will do this again. That is not keeping people safe, and it's not actually keeping people in Gaza safe either, because further attacks on Israel will provoke further retaliation.
Well, Israel's defence forces say Hamas is exploiting innocent Gazans and using civilians as human shields. The military's confirmed another 250 airstrikes were carried out over the past 24 hours, targeting the terror group. The latest figures by the Hamas-run Health Ministry show over 7,300 Palestinians, including more than 3,000 children, have been killed since October the 7th. IDF spokesperson Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari says Hamas is using hospitals for cover, making it difficult to avoid civilian casualties.
Hamas not only endangers the lives of Israelis, civilians, but also exploit innocent Gazan civilians as human shield. Hamas' use of hospitals is a systematic. Hamas terrorists operate inside hospitals precisely because they know the IDF distinguishes between terrorists and civilians. Israel targets terrorists, Hamas target Israeli civilians and Gazan civilians.
Well, a series of rocket barrages have been fired at Israel from Gaza today. A building in southern Tel Aviv was hit earlier, with the missile evading the country's Iron Dome defence system. 3 people were injured. The Met Police says there have been more than 400 anti-Semitic and 170 Islamophobic attacks in the last week in London. The force arrested 75 people in connection with the Israel-Hamas conflict. There are also 10 active investigations linked to internet-related breaches of the Terrorism Act. Authorities in the United States say they're chasing more than 500 leads as they try to track down an Army reservist suspected of killing 18 people in the state of Maine. They've named Robert Card as a person of interest. They say he's armed and dangerous. Divers are being deployed to search a river close to where the suspect's car was found. Maine's Public Safety Commissioner says they're following all lines of inquiry.
While this is going to look like a major focus today with a lot of people, we have a lot of other irons in the fire. So I'm not here saying that the suspect, we know the suspect is in the water and this is what we're doing. What I'm telling you is you're going to see a lot of activity here, and I'm going to tell you that in advance. We've got nothing to hide in that regard at all. So then you're going to have some sonar as well that's going to be utilized here, and that can look like a couple of different things. A remote operating vehicle, an ROV, is divers could use that.
MPs are warning vulnerable people are being put at risk over plans to clear the asylum backlog. The Public Accounts Committee says Home Office proposals to reform the system are incomplete and unrealistic. At the end of June, there were almost 68,000 cases awaiting a decision. NatWest's decision to shut down Nigel Farage's bank account showed serious failings, according to the findings of an independent review. It said the bank failed to treat the GBNews presenter's details confidentially and didn't communicate its decision properly. However, the law firm carrying out the review, Travers Smith, found the closure was lawful and based mainly on commercial reasons. However, Mr Farage believes the moves to shut down his account were because of his political beliefs, and he says there are questions over the law firm's impartiality.
Well, we were told the report would be independent, and then I saw that Travers Smith, a city law firm, had been appointed to look into this case. And when you realise that the emeritus chair of that firm, Chris Hale, is somebody who described the Brexit campaign and those that campaigned in it as racists and xenophobes, I began to wonder just how independent it would be.
Well, we are live across the UK on TV, on your digital radio, and if you want us on your smart speaker, just say play GB News. Now it's over to Michelle.
Hello there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, keeping you company right through till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, the Tory life peer in the House of Lords, Lord Daniel Moylan, and the trade unionist and writer Paul Embry. Good evening.
Good evening.
Both of you. Listen, any regular viewer will remember, right, that last Friday it was touch and go, everyone, as to whether or not Paul Embry was even going to be able to make it in because there were issues with his train. Don't give the answer away, but you had one heck of a nightmare getting home, didn't you, on Friday?
I had one heck of a nightmare.
Don't give the answer away.
I won't give the answer away. It's the understatement of the year. All I would say is my commitment to this channel was obvious through the torture and the torment that I endured on that evening. Thanks, I might say, to Daniel Moylan's privatised railway services, but that's a different
sly dig.
He had a lovely sleep, a lovely opportunity to catch up and refresh himself.
Don't be dropping any hints, right, because...
on a luxurious private train.
Well, right, so here's what I'm going to do. Now, I need to be absolutely clear, right? I can't run official competitions, but I do like to get you involved in my programme. I want you to hazard a guess as to what time you think Paul Embry returned to Norwich. So he left London, he got on the train at 7:30 p.m. What time do you think he arrived in Norwich? This was last Friday evening. Like I said, it's not an official competition. Don't take it too seriously. You don't need to be doing your stretches and limbering up in advance.
So they're not going to win a night out with me as the first prize?
I might give a prize. I think a night out, that's going to push people over the edge.
They'll have to join
people
the queue,
might,
obviously.
yeah, people are going to get a bit too excited about that, and I want them to remain and watch my programme. We could negotiate perhaps a signed photograph of Paul Embry to the person that gets the closest, but we'll negotiate.
Loads, yeah.
We'll see how it goes. So don't forget, what time did Paul Embry get back to Norwich last Friday? You'll see that there is a reason I'm asking you this question when I get to the end of the programme, and Dewberry Tavern is open, because I'm going to give you the answer. It'll make your eyes water. John says, Michelle, you're a hypocrite. You were banging on about the bars in the House of Parliament yesterday, and only the very next day, you're going to have a Prosecco on live TV while you're working. What is going on?
Right.
Yes, but hold on a brief second. On Dewberry Tavern, we are sensible individuals. We just literally take a moment to cheers to the weekend, and on our business we go. We don't start raving, drunk.
No, we wait until the programme's finished before we do that.
Sexually being inappropriate with each other. Sorry to burst any bubbles at home, but that's not what goes on. We are sensible individuals. So I don't have a problem necessarily.
Seen that in the Palace of Westminster.
Well, no, what I'm saying is, yesterday...
3 years now, and I've never seen anybody drunk, let alone...
You've never seen anybody drunk in the Palace of Westminster?
No.
Well, why then, when, according to one body that investigates the complaints, they said, not me, they said the amount of alcohol that was involved in the amount of complaints that they were investigating was eye-watering. It was a clear factor.
When you look at some of the decisions taken, you can only conclude they're intoxicated, can't you? When you see some of the decisions that this government, they must be getting smashed every day, don't
Well,
they?
if some of the goings-on is occurring stark sober, that's even more concerning to me. Anyway, I'm not a hypocrite, John. I'm a professional individual. That's how I would answer that. You know the drill, so you can get in touch with me all the ways possible. Email me, gbviews@gbnews.com, or tweet me, or whatever it's called these days, at gbnews. Lots to go through with you guys tonight. I want to talk to you about local councils, Gaza, Hamas as well. I want to ask you about whether or not we should stop doing business with the Qataris based on their relationship with Hamas. You get in touch and tell me. Also, virtue signalling brands. Is it time that all of that stops? And also, I want to ask you about the weather. Why are we so bad at managing the weather in this country? I can't forget Boris Johnson. You used to advise him.
I did.
Sorry to burst the surprise so early on in the programme. He is now the new presenter, or will be very soon joining the GB News family. What do you make to that?
I think it's absolutely fantastic. He'll have a lot to learn. He's got to learn the secret symbols
Yes.
All those secret symbols that you use. You see,
don't tell my viewers what goes on.
No, but what they
desk.
don't know, but it's not just beneath the desk. Want to know.
Yeah.
You know, you've got all these things while you're communicating constantly with that huge control room up there.
Yes.
You see, and they can't see it. And Boris will have to learn how to do that. Those little winks of the eye, the little comments, the little cues that you give and so on while you're passing to and fro and keeping us all, steering us on the road. Not to mention what goes on behind
this desk, ladies and gents. I can tell you, it's eye-watering stuff. It's private business there. Boris Johnson joining the channel. Good news or not? Look at his face. What?
I will not be popping any champagne corks. Look, it's a great coup for the station, absolutely no doubt about it, because he is box office.
Will he be watching?
I'll probably be watching and shouting at the TV, I would imagine, like a lot of our viewers and listeners. He is not my favourite person by any stretch of the imagination.
Oh, I'm sure he's devastated.
He was not my favourite Prime Minister, and he doesn't speak highly of me by all accounts.
Yeah, that's it, right? Paul Embry doesn't like Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson is not going to sleep tonight. I'm absolutely convinced about that. What do you make to the Boris news at home? Are you delighted? Will you be tuning in? Who else would you like to see presenting a show on the channel? Get in touch all the usual ways and let me know. But you know what? I better crack on and do my job, which is actually to discuss one of the biggest stories in town today, which is your local council. Are they doing a good job or not? We already know, don't we, so many of them are going bust. And now the Local Government Association, which represents a lot of these councils, has basically issued a warning that so many of them do not have enough funds now to simply be able to stand still. You used to be a local councillor. The other interesting thing is that central government has issued a warning to local councils to say any of you lot that are trialling 4-day working weeks, you need to cease and desist immediately. What do you make of the goings-on at councils?
Well, the first thing is that this organisation, the Local Government Association, it's sort of in their DNA to keep asking for more money. That's what they do on behalf of local councils. At the same time, I do have some sympathy because council budgets have been cut over the years, but the duties, the responsibilities are getting bigger. And those responsibilities are created by law. So you say, how much do you spend taking a SEND child to school? How much accompaniment does he have? That's all set by law. They don't, or the law of the courts, or the courts. And they don't have any say over the amount of resources they've got to put into that. Their obligations to the elderly and to the homeless, they're all set for them by law, and they can't deviate very much from that. So when those burdens increase, and particularly, I think, when the government is saying that we're taking people out of hotels and we're refugees, so-called claimants for refugee status, out of hotels and putting them on your budget, effectively, because they'll become homeless, the government's got to step up and pay for that because the councils have no resources to do it. And they're not even allowed to put the council tax up by more than a few percent because that's controlled as well. But why should the council taxpayer pay for some of these things? So I think I've got some sympathy with where the councils are, but they will always be crying, wolf. You can't take it all at face value, but I have got some sympathy with what they're saying at the moment.
Paul?
Been a ticking time bomb for 13 years, hasn't it? It's been a disaster waiting to happen. We have had austerity, certainly for the first decade after 2010, for a large part of it. We see massive cuts to council funding. Some councils in England and Wales, for example, had to endure cuts of around about 30 to 40% of their core government funding. We are seeing spending per head go down by about 20% for some councils. And the truth is that you cannot get public services, local services on the cheap. If you want good provision, if you want effective local public services, then you've got to pay for them. And when you've got a government that has, for the best part of the last decade, been hell-bent on slashing the funding to council services, we end up in a position where councils are in financial crisis. And the sad thing is, actually, these cuts will fall often on the poorest sections of society. The more disadvantaged the area is, the more impact the cuts are likely to have. And this is everyday things. This is open spaces closing. This is libraries closing. This is impact on social care.
There's very little of that.
It's homelessness, Daniel. It's even things like trading standards. It's sports centres and stuff like that.
And trading standards.
Those are the things that are going to be hit, and it matters.
The vast majority of council spending is going on areas that are to do with personal social services. So the elderly, those who can't manage on their own, children who are taken into care or need to be looked after in some other way, children with special disabilities, things like that. That's where the huge amount of budget actually goes. It isn't going into parks. So where the whole thing is breaking down, if you like, and I'm agreeing with you to some extent, but you're painting too bleak and broad a picture.
Hundreds of libraries have closed, for example. David.
Hundreds of libraries.
Hundreds of libraries have closed.
Hundreds of libraries have closed, you say. I don't know whether...
Well, they have.
Well, you can just assert that, but I don't believe that's actually true. But where the burden is falling is it's falling on... The pressure is coming all on those personal social services, and that's what's got to be addressed. The amount councils actually spend on libraries or open spaces is relatively small. If you took the personal social services out of a council, what you'd be left with would be quite a small budget, which would be perfectly manageable from council tax.
But, you know, whether it's small or not, the fact is these are the things that the council often looks to slash first. And it is, you know, an impact on things like...
They can be done on the cheap.
It is an impact on things like homelessness and sports centres and, as I said, libraries and things like that. And we can't underestimate the impact on people who rely on those services. I mean, hundreds of libraries have closed. They are often used by elderly and vulnerable people. And this is the impact that it has when you... when government forces through substantial cuts to government funding. As I said at the beginning, you cannot get public services on the cheap. David Cameron said when he came to power in 2010 and he was hell-bent on imposing his austerity measures, that if any government minister came to him and said that there were no savings to be had in their department, he would send them back and say, go back because you need to find savings, 25% savings or whatever it was at the time that was floated. But
do you not think that's sensible?
Well, I don't think it is particularly sensible because look what happens. 13 years later, we end up in a situation where you've got councils going bankrupt. And this isn't...
Councils are not going bankrupt.
Councils are going...
councils are not going bankrupt for that reason. The councils that have gone bankrupt... For example, look at Birmingham. Birmingham has gone bankrupt not because it's spending too much, but because it's been caught out on its gender equality pay in the courts. That's what's blown them out of the water, not because they're spending too much money and don't have enough income on services. Croydon went bankrupt because they got involved in a property scheme that took them down. So you're mixing all these things up together, painting an overly bleak, utterly unnuanced, and if I may say so, largely ignorant picture. For party political purposes, simply because you've got a bee in your bonnet about David Cameron sensibly trying to save taxpayers' money from being wasted.
So this is just crying wolf in your view. All of these council
no, I have
all
not
of these
said
local
that.
government officials
you heard
who are
what
saying,
I said.
Who are saying,
I gave you a nuanced, intelligent, and knowledgeable.
We are suffering, and you can look at studies that have been carried out, for example, by the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, which has documented in detail the severe impacts of substantial cuts in local authorities and what that means in terms of councils being able to deliver services on the ground. It has had a massive impact.
Can you tell me a year in the last 30 years...
who is disadvantaged to rely on those services? It's great
Can you tell me a year
it's great for you, Daniel.
in the last 30
a lovely
years
posh trendy
when the
part of
local
London,
government
association
services
it
has not said ahead of a budget councils are going bankrupt? Every year they say councils are going bankrupt because that's their job.
What's your question?
When can you last tell me they didn't say that? They say this every year, Paul. Well, you're just getting elated about this. You're just angry because you didn't get enough...
No, I'm angry. I'm angry because you're ignoring the obvious fact that if you slash council funding by something like a third over 10 years, when you get to the end of that line, you will see a very serious and detrimental impact on public services. To deny that that's the case, I think, is just naive and ignorant.
Well, I'll tell you who is angry, the fella in my ear that keeps telling me that I've got to go to a break. Have you still got your library? What about your local council? And whose side of that conversation are you on? Who do you agree with? Get in touch and let me know, and I'll bring you into the conversation. Next up, though, Qatar, of course. We know they are very cosy when it comes to Hamas. They also have their fingers in a lot of pies, do Qataris, here in the UK. Should we be doing business with them all the time that they are pretty much in bed, so to speak, with Hamas? You tell me.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On Mark Dolan tonight, in My Big Opinion, Labour divisions on Israel are the tip of the iceberg. In My Take at 10, ITV and the BBC have embarrassed themselves with their coverage of the Israel conflict. This news gathering isn't as easy as it looks. We've also got broadcasting legend Nicholas Owen, my top pundits and tomorrow's papers. Plus, I'll be responding to the massive story of the day, that Boris Johnson has joined GB News. We're live from 9.
Hi there, Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Daniel Moylan, Paul Embry alongside me. 800 libraries is the figure there or thereabouts over the last 10 years. That's how many have closed. Is your one still open? Do you use it? Get in touch and tell me. Bernard says, if council stopped basically pretending that they were stockbrokers, playing around with public money instead of spending it on what it's supposed to be spent for, perhaps we might be in a better position, so he says. Daniel says, if all these councils are so skint, why are so many of them wasting it on more and more unnecessary roadworks? That is a very good point. There are roadworks absolutely everywhere. What's this? Overstaffed and overpaid. The council tax disappears into the black hole of huge wages and pensions, says Bill. Carol says, I think Paul is great, but why does he keep going on about austerity without reflecting on the cause? One of my other viewers says, can you ask Paul, what was that note that Labour left when they left the office?
Yeah, the Labour Treasury Minister said we've run out of money. It was clearly intended as a joke, and the Tories have milked it for the last 13 years.
Never a truer word said in jest.
A sovereign country which issues its own currency can never run out of money as a matter.
Oh yeah, the printing press.
As a matter of
just
fact,
keep printing
it was clearly a naive joke by the Treasury Minister.
Well, I don't know. Apparently it was a joke. Tell me, did you find it funny? Now, Kath Qatar. We know the situation here, don't we? Of course, they have been doing a lot of negotiation. They're quite close when it comes to Hamas. They've been doing some good work, I have to say, when it comes to working with them to get some hostages released and all the rest of it. But, of course, Qatar is home to many Hamas leaders, has been for quite a long time. Qatar also has fingers in a lot of pies here in the UK, and it's about to expand those tentacles, hundreds of millions of pounds to be precise, into Canary Wharf in London. Many people have said now, actually, that perhaps the UK shouldn't be doing more business with a country like Qatar when they are so close-knit with terrorist organisations such as Hamas. What about you? What do you make to it?
Well, 150 years ago, if I can just bring a little bit of history in here, people would have said that about Britain as well. They'd have said, you're a country where people like Karl Marx and other revolutionaries can sit there in the British Museum Library writing their poisonous bilge, and plotting revolution against the Russian Empire, which many of them had escaped, and so on. And we'd say, yeah, because we're a free country. We're a free country, and people can, as long as they keep the law here, people can say and write what they want. And we would be regarded as the great leftist harbourer of terrorists in those days. But it was because we had an attitude of freedom. Qatar is basically a friend of this country. All right, so they've got Hamas there, but at least you know where they are, which is actually quite good. And even the Israelis need links to talk to Hamas at some stage. I know that they'll never talk to them publicly, but at some stages in the past, and before this event happened, they would have had links, conversations with Qatar at with Hamas at various stages. And it's good to know where people are, and you can have channels of communication. And I don't think Qatar is a poisonous state in any sense at all.
What gets me is the stinking hypocrisy of it. That, you know, we just exhibit double standards the whole time in this country as a matter of our foreign policy. We condemn China, not without reason. We condemn Iran, not without reason. We talk about certain countries being, you know, the axis of evil and language like that because of their appalling human rights records. And at the same time, we are very happy to trade with countries that themselves have got appalling human rights records and are guilty, when you look at reports from Amnesty or the like, are guilty of appalling human rights abuses, the likes of Qatar, the likes of Saudi Arabia. Now, I think that there's an argument to say, look, if a country, you know, it might be a dictatorship, it might have had a bad human rights record, but if it's going in the right direction, if the direction of travel is correct, then there's an argument to say, look, we should think about engaging with that country in a kind of diplomatic sense, in a trading sense, to help encourage them, you know, to come into the fold a little bit more. But where countries, I don't think, have got any interest in doing that sort of thing, I think Saudi Arabia is probably one of those countries, then it's hard to see why we should have such close relationships with some of those countries when, as I said, we condemn other countries who do exactly the same thing. So I just think, you know, when we hear politicians talk, Robin Cook famously talks, you know, in the 90s about if Labour ever came to power, it would have an ethical foreign policy.
Yeah, that was fatal.
I think most people in this country would like to see an ethical foreign policy. We've just never had
But he
one.
says it'd be fatal. Why?
Yeah, we had that was a huge mistake, and it's really damaged Britain. That Robin Cook put that in place, because we think that our job is to go around virtue signalling around the world, thinking it's going to have some effect. And of course we end up with total inconsistency as a result. I mean, one of the countries we wouldn't take investment from in that, if we were really insistent on human rights, is the United States. Well, they have executions. And that's contrary to the European Convention on Human Rights. We shouldn't touch their money with a barge pole. But of course we carry on, because that whole approach that our job is to go around uselessly condemning people and having no effect on them whatsoever and making ourselves look like pompous prigs around the world, surely that's run its course. Our ethical foreign policy is to do the best for the people of Britain. That's what the Foreign Office should be doing.
Are you saying, Daniel, that when it comes
we should be trading. We should be trading with countries, in my view, irrespective of issues to do with human rights. We shouldn't be trading with them if trading with them is damaging our national security. There are things we shouldn't be selling to countries, high-tech things, things we shouldn't be buying from China, like, you know, their all their kit that they put in mobile phones, masks and all of that sort of stuff, because there are national security issues about it. But this idea that we're actually having some effect on making the world better because we're going around waving flags the whole time and shouting at people and looking idiotic. It's totally failed. It's run its course.
You can't, as a country, be a moral vacuum when it comes to these questions. When it comes to no, I don't.
Yeah, the moral vacuum. It's not a moral vacuum.
I don't think
the moral principle.
Hold on.
The moral principle is. The moral principle is that we're obliged to do the best for the people of Britain.
Excuse me. We don't do talking over on this programme because no one can hear.
Well,
right, you've spoken.
I was trying to respond.
Go on.
You cannot be a moral vacuum, at least not if you want to maintain credibility and integrity on the international stage and, in fact, on the domestic stage as well. If you get a Prime Minister stand up one moment and say, you know, the Chinese authorities are absolutely wicked, look at what they're doing to the Uyghur Muslims, for example, look at what they're doing to women in Iran, look at these human rights abuses, but then says, oh, actually, you know, with Saudi Arabia, they do similar sorts of stuff, and Qatar does similar sorts of stuff, but we're going to stand back from that. We're not going to talk about that because we've got trading interests. Then your credibility and your integrity, I think, as a government, simply falls away. Look at Libya.
But I agree with you.
Look at Libya. Libya was an enemy of Britain in the 1980s. Look at Libya in terms of what it did in terms of support for the IRA, in terms of the Lockerbie bombing and its involvement in that.
About Libya.
And then Tony Blair is standing next to Gaddafi in a tent, looking as if they're best friends. You can't have a vacuous policy like that.
You are condemning, not my policy. You're condemning your own policy. I'm saying, it's ludicrous. It's ludicrous what you're doing. You should. There should be clear consistency. The foreign policy of this country should be conducted in the best interests of the people of this country. That's the moral principle it should rest on. And we should not be going around choosing between different countries, whether they're good or bad on that basis. That's what you want to do on a consistent basis.
You would fail to trade with, regardless of the regime, regardless of what's going on in terms of human rights. If we can earn a fast buck out of them, we should trade.
Not earn a fast buck. If we can trade with countries, if we can trade with countries profitably, we should do so, unless there are national security or other interests.
Regardless of what they do to their own people.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. We'll end on that note. Do you agree with that or not? Do you have a red line when it comes to trade? And if so, who would fall foul of it and why? Get in touch. Tell me. Unilever, they apparently are going to announce that all this virtue signalling stuff where you can't even buy a bit of ice cream without being lectured about what you should think about asylum policies. Apparently, lots of that virtue signalling has had its day now, according to the Unilever boss. Good. Do you think other brands should follow suit? You tell me.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Dewbs and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Hi there, Michelle Dewberry till 7. Lord Daniel Moylan alongside me, as is Paul Embry. Lots of you guys getting in touch. A lot of people do not like your suggestion about this repeated printing money, I have to say, Paul. Lots and lots and lots of emails.
Lots of people don't understand the point that's being made, sadly.
Oh, I think Paul's trying to say you're thick. No. Is that what you're trying to say?
No, because it's a cliche to say that, you know, when someone says that a sovereign country that issues its own currency cannot run out of money, then what you're talking about is all the time, we're just printing money and, you know, ending up in hyperinflation. It's much more nuanced than that, much more nuanced.
Well, there you go. That told you guys that are suggesting that at home. On Qatar, Graham says, it's the first time I've agreed with Paul Embry. We shouldn't deal with countries like Qatar or Saudi Arabia. Gus says, look, you know, this is all going to come to a head right now. So as a country, we've got to pick a side. Do we? I don't know. You tell me. Why are we still allowing Qatar Airways to fly into Britain or all the rest of it? Cutting links, he says, would surely benefit domestic airlines. So, I don't know, you don't want to trade with Qatari Airways? At last, someone has mentioned the dubious position of Qatar, says Susan. Lots of different opinions on this, I have to say. Well done, Unilever, says Peter. This is just about the conversation that we're about to have now, because the new Unilever CEO said, and I quote, I believe that a social and environmental purpose is not something that we should force fit on every single brand. This is in direct contradiction, this new boss, with what the previous one said, because the previous boss said in 2019, he said he was going to sell off brands that, I quote, are not able to stand for something more important than just making your hair shiny, your skin soft, your clothes whiter, or your food tastier. I've got to say, I side more with this new boss. You know what? If I want to buy washing powder, it's just because I want my clothes clean. I don't want a moral lecture. I don't want to feel like some company is telling me how I should live my life and all the rest of it. I just want clean clothes, thank you very much. So I applaud this new boss's approach. Do you?
Well, I pick it up from the last one. The question is, what does morality come from? And it comes from purpose. And what's the purpose of a business? The purpose of a business is to lawfully maximise profits by satisfying customers. That's its job. It doesn't need a moral and a social and political purpose. In fact, all that'll happen when it adds those extraneous purposes in is it will go off the tracks and it starts provoking boycotts. And I wouldn't buy a Ben & Jerry. And I wouldn't knowingly go to a dinner party where Ben & Jerry's was being served. I mean, and I don't know anybody who would. And I don't know anybody who would.
You don't know anyone that would go to a dinner party?
I don't know anybody who would. And all you get, if you tell me that a Buckingham Palace garden
you'll be straight there,
is serving Ben & Jerry's, I'd be nowhere near it. But the fact of the matter is, it provokes boycotts and controversy, which in the end drive the businesses away from their main purpose. And the people I feel sorry for are the poor people who lose their jobs when those brands go bankrupt.
Good point, Paul.
I just think people are sick and tired of it. The companies are not doing this sort of stuff because there's a clamour amongst their customers. You know, we want to see Hellmann's mayonnaise and we want to see it with a social purpose. No one has ever said that. They do it, these companies, because they think in some way it's a high status opinion and they can flaunt their so-called progressive credentials to the rest of the world and actually gain some kind of social kudos for that. And they know, I suspect, in many cases that this sort of stuff doesn't sit easily with their average punter, but they kind of think, well, until our profits are being hit, then our average punter is just going to go along with it, and the rest of the world, the people who really matter, the kind and clever people, they're going to see what a wonderful company we are. But when their profits are hit, all of a sudden you start seeing them row back on it. I suspect Bud Light, for example, is not going to feature another trans model ever again because of what happened over the Dylan Mulvaney thing. Arsenal Football Club did a similar thing with Mesut Ozil when he spoke out, when he played for them a couple of seasons ago, and he spoke out over the treatment of the Uyghur Muslims in China. And Arsenal, of course, has got big commercial interests in China and was very quick to put out a statement saying, this is a personal opinion by our player, it's got absolutely nothing to do with us. So these high-status opinions, they will only hold them for as long as they don't think their commercial interests are going to be hit, which tells me that they're not actually genuine opinions.
Are we just getting old, though? You know, we're just basically saying we just want your product to do the job, because the next generation of consumers, the younger people, they are a lot more kind of conscious, aren't they, about what kind of workforce ethics do you have, what supply chains do you use, and how is labour treated and all the rest. People, especially young people, they are very conscious of that stuff.
Yeah, and I'm sorry for them because they've been misled and distracted into thinking that is what business is about. And they're never going to learn the basics of running a profitable business. And so the businesses they work in will cease to be profitable over time as you lose the managerial skills that are focused on the lifeblood of business, which is actually making a profit by satisfying your customer. And they will all gradually go bust, and then they'll wonder why.
But, you know, one of the things that I notice about this kind of whole workery when it comes to businesses is adverts. When you watch adverts in this country, the demographic that they portray in this advert is so different to the actual demographic of the country. It is so obvious and mind-boggling as to why the advertising execs that are preparing these adverts don't seem to sit there and think, this is not really representative of the demographic of which we're choosing to serve, by which I mean every single family will almost certainly be a mixed-race family.
Yeah.
And it's just not reflective. I know you're in a mixed-race marriage, and I wonder, what do you think about that?
I think, I mean, I agree with you, and I think it insults people's intelligence because it's not simply about diversity in action. What we're seeing is hyper-diversity in action. We're seeing a diversity depicted on our TV screens every day, every commercial break, every drama series that does not actually accord with the reality of people's everyday experiences. And it comes back to what I was saying previously about high-status opinions. People do this stuff. They know it doesn't reflect, you know, the real world. When ITV commissioned a new series of The Larkins a couple of years ago, which is set in 1950s rural Kent, which is probably about as white as you can get, and they made it through the cast look like Islington in the 2020s, I think it just insults people's intelligence. And, you know, we're constantly told by companies, corporations, public services, we have to reflect the community that we serve. We have to reflect real Britain. It just seems to me that when it comes to TV and advertising, people move away from that and depict their ideal version of the world and then force-feed it to the rest of us. It's just insulting.
Do you agree with that?
I do agree with all of that, I'm afraid. It's high-status opinions. But I'd say, going back to the foreign policy, it's also a matter of parading high-status opinions to gratify a small number of people rather than looking after the interests of British people.
Well, there you go. William and James Lever, founders of Unilever, must be spinning in their graves at what's been going on.
They were white males.
Says, and those guys were true philanthropists who didn't need to virtue signal anything. He says, Steve repeats that sentence that we hear often, go work, go broke. Neil says, you're all talking about stopping trading with places like Qatar. If we did do that, we'd all be freezing this winter, literally, he says. Graham says, Michelle, all of this company stuff, it's all about using the ESG scores to make business investment decisions. Graham says that should be illegal. Cool, blimey, should it? You tell me. I want to talk to you about a lot of things after the break, not least I want your responses as to what time you think Paul got into Norwich last Friday after leaving London at 7:30. But I also want to ask you a simple question. Why in this country do we seem so unable to cope with bad weather? What's going on? Tell me.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows,
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, welcome back to Dewbs & Co. with me, Michelle Dewberry. The bar is open here at Dewberry Tavern, so I say cheers to you at home, happy weekend, and cheers also to my panel, Lord Daniel
Michelle.
Moylan and Paul Embry.
Cheers, Daniel.
Daniel Moylan in the break just whinging because he said it's not premium beer. I don't know what you...
We had a premium beer last week, and now we've gone back to the
cheap stuff.
It could have been worse. It could have been some Ben & Jerry's ice cream. You'd have walked out.
If been Ben & Jerry's ice cream,
You'd be on your way.
Times are tight. We are still subject to an advertising boycott, you may have noticed, you know, so you're lucky.
Other ice cream is available.
Yeah, you are lucky that the budget is stretching. Anyway, Richard says...
I mean, I hope Ben & Jerry's will be complaining now that we've talked about them so much on their channel, ruining their brand.
Maybe he's a
They'll be
secret
on suing
ambassador.
you. They'll be on suing us. Suing us for mentioning them.
At the start of the
on GB
programme,
News.
John said I had no business talking about wanting to close down bars in the House of Commons when I opened my own one here. But Richard, you're a smart guy. You point out the key difference. You say, Michelle, your drink is not subsidised by the taxpayer. Yes, that is indeed correct. Right, so I've been running a competition the whole time as to what time Paul got back from Norwich. Let me just squeeze this in because in a second I want to talk to you about the weather. And before I do, if I don't remember, all of you have been giving me your answers. Joe, Phil says 10:30. He left London at 7:30. What time, I'm asking you, did he get back to Norwich? Mark says at 10 a.m. Phil says 10:30 p.m. Nick says 6:30 p.m. Royston says 10:45 p.m. Simon says 3:30 a.m. Peter says 7:35 a.m. Tina says 1 minute past midnight. What time did you get home?
I think Peter's the closest. I, as you said, left Liverpool Street at 7:30 in the evening after the show, and I arrived at Norwich Station at 7:40 the following morning.
7:40?
Usually takes me 2 hours. It took me over 12 hours.
So you had to sleep on that trip?
It became the London to Norwich sleeper.
See, that is disgraceful, isn't it?
Often you get a Pullman car for the price of a day return.
Nationalise the railways already.
Alan,
My slogan.
Alan, I mean, loads of you did put suggestions in, so I apologise if I didn't read your suggestion out. Alan said, I want to guess that it was 12:45, but I don't want a signed picture of Paul. That's a bit harsh.
Wouldn't have happened in the days of British Rail, you know. We'd have been a half-hour delay, giving us some curly sandwiches, and we'd have been on our way.
Oh,
it's all these privateers and these money grabbers.
Misty-eyed back to the days of everything being state-owned. Look, before I go, it was the weather that caused the chaos on that journey. I can't get over it. I cannot believe that he didn't get back until that time the following day. So I'm just wanting to ask, why are we in this country seemingly so bad at managing bad weather?
Because we don't invest in infrastructure, number one. We're well behind when it comes to investment in infrastructure compared to many other Western countries. We're terrible at planning. We are riddled with bureaucracy, sometimes unnecessary bureaucracy. Not all red tape is bad when it comes to things like health and safety. And China get it done straight away. We don't. Those are my reasons.
Daniel?
I think the premise is wrong. We don't actually. We're quite good at managing these things, and they happen on a rare and occasional basis. And if you could invest, we do invest a lot of money in flood defences. The Environment Agency is building new flood defences every year, and they have quite a big budget for it, and maintaining and strengthening flood defences. But when you actually ask yourself the question, you know, could you ever make this country proof against floods, so there'd never be a flood again, however hard it rained? What would it cost to do that? And the answer is, it would never be worth doing that. It is always going to be cheaper that some people suffer who clean up.
I can't not talk about this if I'm going to reference floods. 2007, the awful floods, it really did impact Hull. I will never forget one of my school friends, Michael Barnett. He very, very sadly died within those floods. And it was, I remember it so well, the footage was broadcast on Sky News. He was stuck, his foot was stuck in a storm drain. He was a very nice lad, was Michael Barnett. I will never forget him. Who's this? Martin. He says, Michelle, the weather in this country has sometimes always been iffy, but it's the media these days is to blame for all of this. They talk all this stuff up and then they put the frighteners on us all with all sorts of warnings, he says. We are now all becoming a nation of drama queens. But obviously, bad weather, as I've just given one small example, you know, it does kill. On the subject of Boris Johnson, so many of you are absolutely delighted that Boris Johnson will soon be hosting a programme on this channel. Rem says, we love Boris. Great news. We cannot wait. Archie says, brilliant news. Again, I cannot wait. Christine says, fantastic. Go GBNews. John says, I firmly believe this is a grave mistake by GBNews in employing Boris to this channel. Charles says, your brilliant channel will now be undermined by allowing Mr. Johnson to appear. I won't be watching him, he says. There you go, divided opinions. All views welcome on GBNews. Talking about the councils, James says the overheads in the councils are far too high, too many staff. Paul says our council has spent thousands on 20-mile-an-hour signs, but left the roads full of potholes. That is wasteful councils for you. Tony, look at all these gold-plated pensions, then you will get some idea of where all this money is going. You make a very good point, so you do. Look, time absolutely flies, doesn't it, when you are having fun, even if it's got cheap beer. But Lord Moylan, thank you very much for your company tonight. Paul Embry, thank you to yours at home. Thank you to you guys. Very important that you join us. We appreciate your company. Have a fantastic weekend. Lee Anderson, up next. Night-night.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Further rain or showers for many of us this weekend, with some gusty winds around as well. But there will be some drier and brighter interludes, particularly across central and southern parts. Now, overnight, we're going to see a continuation of the showers. In fact, an intensification of the showers across some southern and southwestern parts. Some longer spells of rain pushing into the south and southeast of England for a time with gusty winds. Further showery rain pushing into eastern Scotland as well as Northern Ireland, and in many of these places with the ground very wet, there could be issues by dawn. Now, we're going to see a mild night because of the gusty wind, but in some of these central parts, northern England into the Midlands, East Anglia, a few mist patches and some colder spots as we start off the weekend. Any mist and fog will lift, and then some brighter skies for a time, moving north across the country to affect parts of Wales, the Midlands, East Anglia, parts of northern England into the afternoon. But there'll be further persistent rain for eastern Scotland, could cause some problems at times this weekend, and an upturn in the wet and windy weather then towards the southwest later on. That pushes north on Saturday night into northern England, Northern Ireland and much of eastern Scotland once again. Further south, a return to sunny spells, but also some blustery showers. The showers heaviest and most frequent around southern and western coasts. We keep the showers going in the south on Monday, drier but colder in the north.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?